The air is thick with the smell of ozone and burning graphite, a metallic tang that scratches at the back of the throat. It is April 1986, and high above the ruined reactor number 4, men move like automatons across the slick, blackened roof. Each step kicks up dust, not just any dust, but particles of pure, deadly fission. Their faces, visible beneath thin surgical masks, are grim, fixed on the task. They wear crude lead aprons over their military fatigues, weighing them down, offering only token resistance to the torrent of gamma rays that assaults every cell in their bodies. Geiger counters shriek incessantly, a banshee wail that has become the soundtrack to their existence, ignored, overridden by the urgent shouts of their superiors. They are clearing pieces of graphite, debris ejected from the heart of a nuclear furnace, chunks so lethally radioactive that exposure for mere minutes is a death sentence. Their tools are simple shovels, their mission impossible. They sprint, scoop, throw, and sprint back, a frantic ballet of self-sacrifice. Each man is allowed precisely 90 seconds, maybe 2 minutes if they're lucky, before the radiation dose becomes too critical. There are hundreds, thousands of these fragments. Each one must be cleared, pushed over the edge, away from the collapsing structure, because below, the world is waiting for a miracle. They are the human solution to a technological nightmare, biological robots performing a task no machine could handle. But what kind of future awaited men who stared into the face of death and simply kept shoveling? But to understand how we got here, how ordinary men ended up on the roof of a destroyed nuclear reactor, we need to go back. Back to a time before the whispers of radiation, before the omnipresent hum of Geiger counters, back to the spring of 1986 in the Soviet Union. Imagine Pripyat, a city built for the workers of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. It wasn't just any city, it was a model Soviet town, a showcase of socialist modernity, established in 1970. Young, vibrant families, the brightest minds in nuclear engineering, lived here. The average age was just 26. Children played in pristine parks, couples strolled along tree-lined avenues, and the air buzzed with optimism and the promise of a brighter future fueled by atomic energy. Apartment buildings, schools, hospitals, a palace of culture, all gleamed with fresh paint. The towering Ferris wheel, a symbol of joy and progress, was set to open for the May Day celebrations just days away. Life was good, predictable, and full of the simple pleasures: a shared meal, a competitive game of soccer, an evening concert. The Chernobyl power plant, named after Vladimir Lenin, wasn't just a workplace. It was the pride of the region, a testament to Soviet scientific prowess, providing cheap, abundant electricity. No one in Pripyat worried about the invisible forces at work just a few kilometers away. They trusted their engineers, their technology, their government. They believed in the future, in progress, in the inherent safety of their modern world. They believed they were shielded, protected, living a dream. This idyllic vision, however, was about to shatter, revealing a horrifying reality beneath its polished surface. The Chernobyl disaster didn't occur in a vacuum. It was a product of its time, deeply rooted in the political and ideological landscape of the Soviet Union. By the mid-1980s, the Soviet Union was locked in the final, tense decades of the Cold War with the West. Nuclear power was not merely a source of electricity. It was a potent symbol of Soviet technological superiority and industrial might. The RBMK-1000 reactor, the type used at Chernobyl, was a uniquely Soviet design, favoring rapid construction and plutonium production for weapons over inherent safety features prevalent in Western designs. This was a critical flaw. There was immense pressure from Moscow to meet electricity quotas, to project an image of unstoppable progress. Safety protocols, while officially existing, were often overlooked or intentionally bypassed in the relentless pursuit of output targets. The culture of secrecy and denial endemic to the Soviet system meant that critical information about design flaws or operational incidents was suppressed, never reaching the public or even lower-level engineers. Dissidents were jailed, truth was malleable, and the party line was absolute. This meant that the engineers and operators at Chernobyl, while highly trained, were operating within a system that prioritized political expediency over transparent safety. They were cogs in a colossal machine, expected to perform, not to question. The consequences of this system, of this deep-seated ideological imperative, were about to manifest in the most catastrophic way imaginable, proving that some secrets refuse to stay buried, and some truths are forged in fire and radioactive fallout. This rigid environment would become the ultimate crucible for catastrophe, where human error met systemic failure. The fuse was lit long before the explosion, in the seemingly benign setting of a routine safety test. On the night of April 25, 1986, the crew of reactor number 4 was preparing to conduct an experimental safety test, one that was meant to simulate a station blackout and test the reactor's ability to power its emergency cooling pumps using residual turbine energy. This was not a novel test. It had been attempted before unsuccessfully. But this time the pressure was on. A shift change occurred, bringing in a less experienced night crew, led by Deputy Chief Engineer Anatoly Dyatlov, a man known for his authoritarian style and relentless push for results. As the test began, a crucial misstep occurred. The reactor's power was reduced too quickly, dropping far below the safe operating minimum of 700 megawatts. This created a highly unstable state, a phenomenon known as xenon poisoning, where the reactor's neutron-absorbing byproducts built up, making it difficult to control. Despite multiple warnings from the automatic safety systems, which tried to shut the reactor down, Dyatlov, obsessed with completing the test, ordered the operators to override these critical safeguards. He dismissed the alarms, confident in his own judgment, ignoring the basic physics screaming at them from the control panel. The power levels fluctuated wildly, a dangerous dance on the edge of catastrophe, but the crew, under pressure, kept pushing. They believed they were in control, that the immense power of the atom was harnessed. They were tragically mistaken, unknowingly pushing the reactor past a point of no return, into a realm where human commands held no sway. The stage was set not for a safety test, but for an unraveling of epic proportions. The situation inside reactor number 4 escalated with terrifying speed. With safety systems overridden and power levels dangerously low, the operators, following Dyatlov's orders, attempted to raise the reactor's power again. To do this, they withdrew nearly all of the control rods, the neutron-absorbing elements that regulate the nuclear chain reaction. This was a direct violation of safety protocols and a critical error that would prove fatal. At 1:23 a.m. on April 26th, the final fatal sequence began. As the control rods were withdrawn, the reactor's core became incredibly unstable. The water coolant designed to remove heat began to boil violently, forming steam bubbles. This positive void coefficient, a critical design flaw of the RBMK reactor, meant that as more steam formed, the reaction accelerated, not slowed down. It was a runaway train. The power output surged to an unimaginable 100 times its normal operating level in milliseconds. A horrified operator, Leonid Toptunov, finally hit the AZ5 button, the emergency shutdown. But it was too late. The control rods, designed to drop rapidly and halt the reaction, became jammed in the distorted fuel channels. Instead of shutting down the reactor, their movement into the superheated core displaced water, causing an even greater power spike. The core literally exploded. The first explosion, a steam explosion, blew the 1,000-ton concrete lid clean off the reactor, sending it soaring through the roof like a discarded toy. The night crew felt the ground shake, a deafening roar followed by an eerie silence, and then a second, far more powerful explosion, a hydrogen blast that ripped through the building, spraying radioactive debris across the surrounding area. The immediate aftermath was unimaginable. No one could have conceived of such a destructive force emanating from a power plant. The reactor building was a ruin, a gaping maw spewing incandescent plasma and deadly isotopes into the night sky, its core exposed to the open air. The silent, invisible enemy had been unleashed, and the world was utterly unprepared for its relentless assault. In the immediate aftermath, a profound ignorance of the true scale of the catastrophe gripped the plant. The initial reports were confused: fire in the turbine hall, minor roof damage. No one, not even the plant director Viktor Brukhanov, grasped that the reactor core itself had exploded. Firefighters from Pripyat were the first on the scene, heroic brigades like those led by Lieutenant Vasily Ignatenko. They rushed towards the blaze without hesitation, battling the inferno that consumed the turbine hall and spread across the reactor's roof. They were equipped for ordinary fires, with standard protective gear, oblivious to the invisible enemy saturating the air. They complained of a sweet metallic taste in their mouths, a symptom of acute radiation sickness, but continued their valiant efforts. Many reported seeing a beautiful, almost ethereal blue-white glow emanating from the ruins of reactor number 4, the eerie luminescence of ionizing radiation, known as Cherenkov radiation, signaling the exposed core. It was a sight of devastating beauty, a silent siren of death. As the sun rose on April 26th, the true horror began to reveal itself. Plant employees, even after witnessing the destruction, were ordered to manually cool what they believed was an intact core. Helicopters were dispatched, but their crews were told to drop sand and lead into the crater, a futile exercise against an active nuclear furnace. The local population of Pripyat, just 3 kilometers away, woke to a quiet, pleasant morning. Children went to school oblivious. The city's May Day celebrations were still planned. Yet an invisible plume of death drifted over their homes, saturating everything. The official story emerging from the plant was a monstrous lie of omission, an intentional downplaying of the severity. It became clear that something didn't add up. The calm pronouncements from official channels stood in stark, terrifying contrast to the dying men, the glowing ruins, and the persistent, metallic taste of death on the wind. Everything pointed one way: a contained, if severe, industrial accident. The Soviet authorities, in their initial public statements, maintained a chilling silence, denying the scale of the catastrophe. No immediate evacuation of Pripyat was ordered, no public warnings were issued. The local party committees were more concerned with preventing panic and maintaining the narrative of Soviet invincibility. Yet the truth, as always, has a way of defying suppression. But then a distinct and terrifying anomaly appeared, not in Pripyat, but thousands of kilometers away. On Monday, April 28, 1986, 2 days after the explosion, monitoring stations at the Forsmark nuclear power plant in Sweden, over 1,100 kilometers northwest of Chernobyl, began detecting unusually high levels of radiation. Initially, Swedish scientists suspected a leak at their own plant. But after thorough checks revealed no internal fault, they quickly traced the radioactive plume to its source, the Soviet Union. When confronted, Moscow was forced to acknowledge that an accident had occurred at Chernobyl. Even then, the TASS news agency, the official Soviet outlet, reported only damage to one of the reactors and that measures are being taken to eliminate the consequences. They spoke of an accident that posed no threat to the population. This revelation, forced upon the world by independent observation, cracked the monolithic facade of Soviet secrecy. It wasn't just a fire, it was an event of global significance, threatening entire nations. The invisible killer had breached national borders, announcing its presence to the world, making a mockery of official denials. This external confirmation, this irrefutable evidence of a massive radioactive release, was the pivot point. It transformed a hidden tragedy into an undeniable international crisis, revealing a dangerous truth that the Soviet government desperately tried to keep under wraps. The world was now watching, demanding answers. What the pivot revealed was a terrifying glimpse into the Soviet state's priorities: control and image over human lives. The forced acknowledgement to the international community did not translate into immediate transparency or care for the affected population. For more than 36 hours after the explosion, the residents of Pripyat, a city of 50,000, remained completely unaware of the deadly radiation cloud engulfing their homes. Children played outside, oblivious. People went to work. The decision not to evacuate was a deliberate one, made by party officials who feared panic and the admission of a catastrophic failure. They clung to the hope that the situation could be managed without public alarm. The true extent of the radiation release was systematically downplayed, not just to the outside world, but to those closest to the disaster. Doctors in local hospitals were not informed of the nature of the injuries they were treating, leading to tragically inappropriate care for radiation victims. Many were told they had thermal burns or vegetative vascular dystonia. There were even orders to confiscate radiation monitors from medical personnel and prevent them from using them. Meanwhile, bus convoys were being secretly assembled, waiting for the eventual, inevitable order to evacuate, an order delayed by political machinations. The Soviet government's initial response was a masterclass in obfuscation and outright denial, a desperate attempt to maintain an illusion of control. This wasn't just about suppressing information, it was about actively disseminating misinformation, a deadly gamble played with the lives of hundreds of thousands. The detail nobody talks about enough is the sheer moral cowardice that allowed an entire city to bask in a deadly radioactive glow for over a day and a half, sacrificing their health on the altar of state secrecy. This silence, this intentional blindness, proved to be as lethal as the radiation itself. The true, indelible mark of Chernobyl is etched onto the lives of individuals. No story exemplifies this human cost more poignantly than that of Vasily Ignatenko, a 25-year-old firefighter from Pripyat. Vasily was among the first responders, a member of the plant's paramilitary fire department. On the night of April 26th, he answered the call without hesitation, rushing to the inferno with his comrades. He was strong, charismatic, and deeply in love with his wife, Lyudmila, who was pregnant with their first child. Within hours of battling the blaze, Vasily began to show the horrific symptoms of acute radiation sickness. His face swelled, his skin turned crimson, and he suffered from incessant vomiting and diarrhea. He, along with 27 other severely affected firefighters and plant workers, was flown to Hospital No. 6 in Moscow, a specialized clinic for radiation injuries. Lyudmila, defying all warnings from doctors and nurses about the dangers of contamination, refused to leave his side. She watched in agony as her husband's body slowly disintegrated. His skin began to peel away in sheets, his hair fell out, and his internal organs failed one by one. Vasily, once a vibrant young man, became a source of lethal radiation, a dying man whose touch could harm his unborn child. Lyudmila, in an act of incredible, heartbreaking devotion, cared for him, cleaned him, held his hand, knowing the invisible enemy was passing from him to her. Vasily Ignatenko died on May 13, 1986, just 17 days after the explosion. His body, so radioactive it had to be sealed in a zinc coffin and buried under concrete, was a testament to his sacrifice. Lyudmila later gave birth to a daughter, Natashenka, who died just 4 hours later due to congenital heart defects and cirrhosis, believed to be caused by the radiation exposure passed from Vasily to Lyudmila. Vasily's story, meticulously documented by Nobel laureate Svetlana Alexievich, is not an anomaly. It is the visceral embodiment of the countless lives shattered by the disaster, reminding us that behind every statistic lies a human being with a name, a family, and a future brutally stolen. And the full extent of this devastation was systematically concealed. The tragic stories like Vasily Ignatenko's were not isolated incidents. They were part of a systematic pattern of denial and obfuscation that characterized the Soviet response to Chernobyl. What was hidden, denied, or never fully explained was the true human cost, the long-term health consequences, and the systemic failures that allowed the catastrophe to happen. The number of immediate deaths was officially reported as 31, a figure that remained largely static for decades. This figure drastically downplayed the reality. While 31 may have been the immediate fatalities from the explosions and acute radiation sickness in the first few weeks, it excluded the hundreds of thousands of liquidators who received debilitating doses, the residents of contaminated zones, and the unborn children affected. The Soviet government deliberately suppressed data on radiation-related illnesses and deaths, categorizing them under other causes or simply making records disappear. Doctors were pressured to avoid diagnosing radiation sickness unless absolutely necessary, fearing repercussions. The full health impact on the 600,000 to 800,000 liquidators, conscripted soldiers, civilian workers, miners, and engineers who were sent to clean up the disaster, often with inadequate protection and minimal information, was particularly shrouded in secrecy. Many were simply designated invalids without a specific cause, or their conditions attributed to old age or lifestyle factors, who benefited from this silence. The Soviet state. Admitting the true scale of the disaster, the design flaws of the RBMK reactor, and the health devastation would have been a monumental blow to its prestige and its claim of technological superiority. It would have fueled dissent and undermined public trust in a system already facing internal pressures. The cover-up was not just about hiding a failure, it was about protecting the very foundations of a totalitarian regime. The deliberate destruction of records and the pressure on medical professionals created a silent graveyard of truth, where countless lives were sacrificed, not just to the atom, but to the ruthless calculus of state power. The true count of suffering was lost in the archives, buried deep beneath layers of political expediency. Despite the Soviet Union's concerted efforts to suppress the truth, the scale of the Chernobyl disaster was too immense and its implications too global to remain entirely hidden. As international pressure mounted and independent scientists began to analyze the fallout patterns across Europe, a more accurate picture started to emerge. Investigators, historians, and scientists, often working against official resistance, began to piece together the events of April 26th. What they found was a chilling combination of critical design, flaws in the RBMK reactor, and profound operational mismanagement. The RBMK reactor had a dangerous positive void coefficient, meaning that as the water coolant turned to steam, the nuclear reaction accelerated rather than slowing down. This made the reactor inherently unstable at low power, precisely the conditions under which the test was conducted. Furthermore, the emergency shutdown rods themselves, the AZ-5 button, had graphite tips that, for a few crucial seconds upon insertion, actually increased reactivity before the neutron-absorbing boron kicked in. This fatal flaw was known within the Soviet nuclear industry, but kept secret from the operators. The initial Soviet inquiry, conducted in August 1986, largely blamed the operators, particularly Anatoly Dyatlov, who was sentenced to 10 years in a labor camp. However, subsequent international and later, more transparent Russian investigations confirmed the structural and design deficiencies. Critical reports from the International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA, and independent experts highlighted the systemic issues that prioritized production over safety and concealed vital information. These investigations revealed not just human error, but a deeply flawed system that set the stage for catastrophe. The evidence unearthed by diligent investigators showed that the disaster was not merely an unfortunate accident. It was a consequence of a dangerous confluence of technical vulnerability and a pervasive culture of secrecy and denial. The deeper they looked, the more the human error explanation began to unravel, revealing a darker, more complex truth beneath. The official Soviet explanation for the Chernobyl disaster was initially unequivocal. It was entirely the fault of the operators. Anatoly Dyatlov, along with plant director Viktor Brukhanov and chief engineer Nikolai Fomin, were publicly blamed, arrested, and ultimately sentenced to prison for criminal mismanagement. The narrative was simple and convenient. A handful of irresponsible, ill-disciplined men had violated safety regulations, leading to the catastrophe. This explanation served a crucial purpose for the Soviet state. It deflected blame from the inherent design flaws of the RBMK reactor and from the systemic pressures of the Soviet industrial complex. By pinpointing individual human error, the government avoided admitting culpability for creating a dangerous reactor type that was unique to the Soviet Union, a design known internally to have serious stability issues at low power. It also sidestepped the culture of secrecy that prevented operators from being fully aware of these design flaws. However, this official explanation began to crumble under closer scrutiny. While operator errors certainly played a significant role, The violation of multiple safety protocols and the override of automatic shutdown systems were undeniable. It was not the full picture. The operators were working with incomplete information, unaware of the specific design deficiencies that made their reactor prone to such a catastrophic runaway reaction. They were also operating under immense pressure to complete the test, a culture that encouraged cutting corners to meet quotas. The idea that a few rogue individuals were solely responsible for an event of this magnitude proved to be a convenient fabrication, designed to protect the image of the state and its technology. It was a partial truth, weaponized to obscure a far more uncomfortable reality, that the seeds of the disaster were sown not just by human hands, but by the very system that created the reactor itself. And as investigations continued, the true complexity of the disaster and the culpability of the system became increasingly undeniable. The most credible theory, painstakingly pieced together by independent experts and later acknowledged by international bodies, points not to a single cause, but to a calamitous confluence of factors. Chernobyl was not merely an operator error or a design flaw. It was a systemic failure rooted in the very structure and priorities of the Soviet nuclear program. The evidence points to three primary culprits acting in concert. Firstly, the critical design flaws of the RBMK reactor, its positive void coefficient, its graphite-tipped control rods, and its general instability at low power. These were not just theoretical weaknesses, they were known dangers that had been downplayed or concealed from operators. Secondly, the culture of secrecy and suppression within the Soviet Union played a crucial role. Information about the reactor's vulnerabilities was classified, preventing engineers and operators from fully understanding the risks they faced. Critical safety reports were buried. This bred an environment where adherence to procedure was often seen as less important than meeting production targets, and questioning authority was dangerous. Thirdly, the human element of operator error, compounded by inadequate training and a lack of clear communication, contributed directly to the chain of events. The operators on that fateful night, under pressure and likely unaware of the full implications of their actions due to the secrecy, bypassed safety protocols that should have prevented the disaster. They acted within a flawed system, making critical mistakes. Therefore, the closest truth is that Chernobyl was a catastrophe born of a dangerous and often deadly synergy between a fundamentally flawed reactor design, a pervasive culture of secrecy and political pressure, and a series of critical human errors made by operators who were, to a significant extent, victims of the system they served. It was a ticking time bomb, and that night, every component of its mechanism aligned to trigger the inevitable. This truth, far more complex and damning, underscores the tragic lesson of the disaster, that transparency and robust safety culture are paramount when dealing with forces as immense as atomic energy. And the ultimate consequences were borne by those forced into its immediate aftermath. The true, most disturbing fact of the Chernobyl disaster, the one that lingers long after the smoke cleared and the initial panic subsided, lies deep within the sarcophagus, in the belly of the beast itself. It is the elephant's foot. This isn't some abstract scientific term. It is a solid mass of highly radioactive corium, a lava-like material formed when the reactor core melted down. Located in the basement of reactor number 4, beneath the destroyed control room, the elephant's foot is a silent, petrified monument to unimaginable destruction. It measures several meters across and weighs hundreds of tons. When it was discovered months after the explosion, its radiation levels were so extreme that standing near it for just 300 seconds would result in a lethal dose, killing a person in under a minute. The initial photographs taken by remote cameras show a grotesque, wrinkled mass, a viscous, hardened flow of what was once the heart of a nuclear reactor. Its name comes from its appearance, a thick, lumpy, gray-black mass that strikingly resembles an elephant's foot. It remains one of the most dangerous objects on Earth, a potent symbol of uncontrolled nuclear power. Even today, decades later, its radiation output is still high enough to be lethal, requiring extreme caution and specialized robotic equipment for any proximity. The disturbing fact is that this monster, born of human ingenuity and hubris, will remain dangerously radioactive for tens of thousands of years, far outliving human civilization as we know it. It is an enduring, silent sentinel of humanity's brush with atomic apocalypse, a stark reminder that some wounds to the earth are permanent, and some mistakes carry a price tag measured in geological epochs. This frozen river of death, this elephant's foot, is the ultimate testament to the destructive power unleashed that night, a legacy of poison that will persist for generations far beyond our comprehension, a constant, chilling whisper from the heart of a dead star, reminding us that we are still living with the consequences. The story of the Chernobyl liquidators is more than a historical footnote. It is a profound lesson in human nature, the fragility of technology, and the enduring consequences of political hubris. It tells us about the extraordinary courage of ordinary men and women who, often without full knowledge or adequate protection, stepped into the face of an invisible, deadly enemy to save a continent. Their sacrifice, largely unacknowledged and often silenced, protected millions from even worse fates. But it also reveals the darker side of human governance, the lengths to which states will go to protect their image, to deny culpability, and to suppress uncomfortable truths, even at the cost of countless lives. Chernobyl exposed the catastrophic dangers of a system where transparency is sacrificed for expediency, and where scientific facts are subjugated to political narratives. The disaster shattered the illusion of Soviet invincibility and contributed to the eventual collapse of the empire. But its legacy extends far beyond geopolitics. It forever altered our perception of nuclear energy, forcing a global reevaluation of safety protocols and international cooperation. The exclusion zone around Chernobyl, a vast, poisoned wilderness, remains a stark reminder that some scars on the planet are permanent and some wounds heal only across millennia. The liquidators, the forgotten heroes, endured unspeakable suffering, their lives cut short, their health irrevocably damaged, their stories often unheard. Their bravery, however, shines as a beacon against the darkness of that tragic night, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit in the face of the ultimate terror. Their names may fade, but their silent courage echoes through the contaminated forests and abandoned streets of Pripyat, a timeless warning from the past. If this kept you up at night, subscribe. We post dark history every week.